India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, not known for idle threats or casual gestures, has just delivered a blistering address to his National Assembly. But what began as a speech about global cooperation quickly spiralled into a direct assault on Britain's political establishment, and most shockingly on Keir Starmer himself. Modi has named names, he has revealed dates, and he's presented something far more dangerous than just rhetoric. Documents, meetings, backroom deals, proof, or so he claims, of a secret political arrangement involving the Labour leader that could rewrite the last 3 years of British foreign policy. And now Britain is reeling, because if even a fraction of what Modi said is true, it doesn't just threaten Starmer's leadership, it threatens to bring down the entire parliamentary order. Within minutes of the speech, social media exploded. Political commentators across both nations began scrambling for context, but the weight of the allegations dropped like a sledgehammer. The Prime Minister of one of the world's most powerful democracies accusing the UK's opposition leader, the man many believe will soon take number 10, of betrayal, manipulation and secret allegiances. This is not just politics. This is war between power blocks, and it's personal. Section 1, the revelation that shattered Parliament. It began, as these moments often do, with silence. No British outlet had anticipated it. Modi's speech had been scheduled as a routine address, a forward-looking statement ahead of G20 preparations. There was no chatter, no leaks, no warnings. But then, at the 17-minute mark, Modi shifted. He looked straight into the cameras. And he uttered the name Keir Starmer. And not as a partner, not as a counterpart, but as a man whose hidden moves had undermined the trust of nations. The Indian Parliament fell quiet, and then the words came like a hammer blow. The British opposition leader has interfered, not just in diplomatic matters, but in India's sovereign policies, using back-channel networks for political leverage in Britain's domestic scene. This is not conjecture, this is fact. Within seconds, India's national broadcasters pushed the clip to air. And just moments after that, the storm hit the UK. Sky News, GB News, even the BBC, all cut to breaking coverage. Social media erupted. The word treason began trending across multiple platforms. But what made this moment more than just theatre was the evidence. Modi held up what appeared to be official internal memos. Dated, signed, typed on British parliamentary letterhead. They referred to undisclosed communications between Starmer's foreign policy advisors and senior Indian opposition leaders at a time when India was in the middle of a national protest crisis. According to Modi, these messages encouraged the Indian opposition to stand firm against Modi's farmer bill reform, with an explicit promise of UK media support and political pressure from the British Labour Party in return. If true, this wasn't just opinion sharing, it was international political interference. And what made it even more explosive was that the dates coincided exactly with several of Starmer's public statements praising the courage of Indian protesters and the importance of protecting minority voices. At the time, it was seen as a principled stance. But in Modi's framing, it was strategic subversion, a calculated move to destabilise his government and weaponise Indian unrest for Labour's political advantage at home. Inside Westminster, the fallout was immediate. Labour MPs went into panic mode. Multiple backbenchers were seen leaving the chamber during urgent debates. Phones lit up across party lines. Shadow cabinet meetings were pulled forward. An emergency press briefing was rumoured for later that evening. But the Tories didn't wait. Senior Conservative MPs seized the opportunity like sharks in bloodied water. One former Defence Secretary told reporters outside Parliament, if these documents are real, then Starmer has not just undermined a foreign government, he's undermined the integrity of the British Parliament. That is not opposition, that is sabotage. But it didn't stop there, because just hours after Modi's revelation, a former Labour staffer came forward anonymously to confirm that the communication with Indian opposition leaders had taken place. And they added something no one was expecting, that Starmer personally approved the message content and that he had been warned at the time about the possible consequences of meddling in foreign policy during a politically sensitive period. And what did he do? According to the source, he said India won't call it out. They need the UK too much. Now, the world sees that as a miscalculation because India has not only called it out, it's broadcast it across the globe. And suddenly, the man seen as Britain's inevitable next Prime Minister is looking less like a statesman and more like a liability. But what exactly was the goal behind this political game? What did Keir Starmer hope to gain by risking international fallout for domestic influence? And more importantly, if he's done it once, how many more of these backroom foreign strategies have yet to be uncovered? This is no longer about India. This is about trust, integrity, and the soul of British leadership. And behind the scenes, there's something even more dangerous building because the royal palace, so far silent, has just been briefed. The king knows. The question is, will he speak? For hours, silence gripped the heart of the United Kingdom, but not the silence of calm. The silence of something far more dangerous, the silence before collapse. After Modi's exposé echoed across every major news outlet, the narrative shifted from, is this true, to who already knew. Behind the velvet curtains of Westminster, a second crisis began to unfold. One not just about diplomacy, but about the institutions meant to protect the nation from rogue power. At the centre of this new storm was an unsettling question. Why hadn't anyone stopped Starmer? As reports flooded in, it became clear this wasn't the first whisper of foreign interference tied to the Labour leadership. Intelligence briefings dating back nearly 18 months, marked confidential by the Foreign Office, reportedly raised flags about unusual communication patterns between Labour policy aides and political figures in India, Canada, and even a select group in Brussels. And yet, nothing was done. Insiders now confirm that elements of MI6 were aware. Internal security briefings had warned senior figures across both major parties that Starmer's foreign strategy team had bypassed traditional diplomatic routes on more than one occasion. Worse still, the House of Commons Intelligence and Security Committee had received those exact same reports. But no investigation was opened, no hearings were called, no questions were asked. Why? Because according to a leaked communication published by a whistleblower just hours after Modi's speech, senior civil service members believed raising a probe against a rising opposition leader would damage the integrity of the 2024 election cycle. In other words, they were afraid of rocking the boat. So they let it sail straight into a diplomatic iceberg. Now, the blame isn't just falling on Keir Starmer. It's raining down on the entire Westminster machine. Across London, the people are watching in disbelief. Outside Parliament, demonstrators began to gather. Some held signs calling for truth over power. Others demanded Starmer step down immediately. But the atmosphere shifted when word broke that King Charles had been privately briefed and was considering issuing a statement. The monarch, who is traditionally silent on party politics, now faced a moral crisis too great to ignore. The allegations had gone global. International trust in the UK's political neutrality was fracturing, and his people were demanding leadership. According to palace sources close to Sandringham, Charles had spent much of the evening in consultations with senior constitutional advisors. A rare meeting was scheduled with the Prime Minister, but not Rishi Sunak, but the actual head of state, the King himself. And for the first time in decades, royal protocol was being quietly rewritten. Because when a government fails to protect its own integrity, the Crown must consider stepping in. But make no mistake, this isn't about ceremonial outrage. This is about what lies beneath. Because while the press focused on Starmer and Modi, something darker was emerging behind closed doors. The unmasking of a power network that had grown in the shadows of British politics. A group of elite policy influencers, some unelected, some former intelligence officers, others foreign-born donors, all working quietly to reshape Labour's global alliances ahead of the next election. And it appears they had a mission to reorient Britain away from traditional Commonwealth diplomacy and toward a modern internationalist agenda dictated by technocrats and trade lobbyists rather than by Parliament. That may sound abstract, but its impact is already visible. Over the past 2 years, Labour's official policy platform shifted from cautious domestic investment to expansive foreign green partnerships, EU-style regulatory harmonisation and new tech trade alignments. At the time, it was praised as visionary. But now those same policies are being re-examined under a new, sinister light. Were they truly meant to help Britain recover? Or were they tailored to benefit private global interests with backdoor access to Labour leadership? Modi's revelations have blown that question wide open. When the clock struck noon the following day, the kingdom held its breath. For the first time in decades, Buckingham Palace, not Downing Street, became the centre of national anticipation. Royal guards were doubled at the gates. Journalists crowded the perimeter. Helicopters circled like hawks. And inside, King Charles III, a monarch not yet 2 years into his reign, prepared to do what no modern sovereign had dared: intervene in a live political scandal before the storm turned into a constitutional collapse. By 12:07 p.m, the signal was given. The Palace Press Office released a rare immediate statement, not through a middleman, not via silence or coded language, but from the King himself. In light of the serious revelations presented by a foreign head of state concerning the conduct of a senior British political leader, I have today requested an emergency consultation with the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and senior representatives of the Intelligence and Security Committee. As sovereign, I am bound to uphold the trust placed in our institutions by the people of this realm. That trust is now in jeopardy. The impact was seismic. For the first time since the abdication crisis of 1936, the monarch had effectively stepped into a live political firestorm, not as a symbol, but as a moral authority. And it worked. Within the hour, Keir Starmer's motorcade was seen entering the palace gates. He did not smile, he did not wave. For a man often described as measured and calm, his face was visibly pale, tight with the weight of 1,000 watching cameras. No one knows what was said inside that royal room, but what followed shook the core of Britain's democratic establishment. Because the Crown, the intelligence services and the Parliament were now on an unavoidable collision course. That afternoon, MI6, under pressure from both public scrutiny and direct royal consultation, unsealed portions of the classified security report long buried inside the vaults of Whitehall. The files, released to a closed session of the Intelligence and Security Committee, outlined a pattern of behaviour that turned rumour into institutional crisis. They didn't just confirm Modi's accusations, they went further. The documents included logs of encrypted communications between Labour aides and 3 Indian political strategists, one of whom was later linked to Russian intelligence influence campaigns. Surveillance records showing 3 unregistered diplomatic meetings between Starmer's policy envoy and agents tied to a corporate consortium with influence in both South Asia and the Gulf. Financial traces connecting a British law firm advising the Labour Party to shadow entities in Singapore, used to funnel campaign support and strategic consultancy payments. And then came the final dagger, a series of internal memos marked highly confidential, where Labour advisers debated whether or not continued engagement with non-allied state networks could be spun as foreign policy innovation if leaked to the press. The words were not damning by accident. They were calculated. The phrase non-allied state networks was code for nations with authoritarian leanings, those outside of NATO consensus. And the engagement being referred to: private off-record meetings to secure policy influence and media coordination in South Asian territories, using British political capital as leverage. To put it plainly, this wasn't just diplomacy, it was ideological mercenary work, dressed in progressive policy but steeped in ambition and betrayal, and it had one goal: to accelerate Labour's geopolitical leverage, regardless of the cost to Britain's sovereign neutrality. Now the dominoes were falling. Members of the Intelligence Committee, sworn to secrecy, began leaking fragments of the truth to key journalists. Former Labour ministers, suddenly unwilling to fall on the sword for a party leader they no longer trusted, began circulating an internal petition to trigger a no-confidence vote within the opposition ranks. One prominent Labour MP was heard saying, "We didn't sign up for this." If Keir did what they're saying, he's put power before country. That's not Labour, that's betrayal. Meanwhile, outside the palace, the crowds had grown into the thousands. Some waved Union Jacks, others held signs calling for a royal-led government commission. Chants of monarchy over mayhem clashed with cries of "Parliament is broken!" The UK hadn't seen unrest like this since the days of Brexit. But this time there was no vote, no referendum, no exit clause. This was institutional chaos. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, now found himself in a vice grip. For months, he had presented himself as the steady hand, the centrist contrast to Starmer's cold calculation. But now, if he failed to act, the perception would turn from stability to complicity. The rain had barely stopped falling over Westminster when the unthinkable happened. Parliament was suspended, not by vote, not by order of a rogue government, but by mutual breakdown. Inside the Commons, chaos reigned. Outside, the streets had transformed into a boiling pressure cooker of outrage, despair, and something far more dangerous, disbelief in the system itself. The Crown had spoken. The Prime Minister had caved. The opposition had shattered. And now, as night draped over Britain like a black veil, a nation long famed for its stoic composure stood face to face with a grim truth. The centre could no longer hold. In a late-night address, brief, cold and etched with exhaustion, Rishi Sunak declared that all parliamentary activities would be paused for 72 hours to allow for independent review and national consultation. But everyone knew what it really was, a political ceasefire born not from strategy, but from institutional paralysis. What began as a single accusation from India's Prime Minister had now revealed a spiderweb of power and deception, stretching across both benches, across continents, across the very soul of British democracy. Keir Starmer may have lit the match, but the rot was in the walls. And now the building was burning. In homes across the country, televisions flickered with panel after panel of stunned analysts, historians and former ministers all circling the same impossible question: how did we get here? The answer, it turns out, wasn't in a single scandal or speech. It was in the slow erosion of public trust over decades. Expenses fraud, Iraq, Brexit lies. Pandemic, PPE, contracts. It was in the smug grins of career politicians who mistook their title for immunity. And now, at last, the people had reached their limit. The monarchy may have remained a symbol, but tonight, the people became the sword. Crowds surged in Glasgow, in Liverpool, in Bristol, once divided by politics, now united by betrayal. In Birmingham, a spontaneous occupation of the city council chambers erupted, with activists reading aloud the King's statement as though it were sacred scripture. Meanwhile, online movements gained impossible speed. A campaign titled Restore the Realm hit 1 million signatures in under 6 hours, demanding the creation of a Royal Oversight Council, a legally binding mechanism to review all foreign political donations and backroom alliances. But not all voices were calling for monarchy. Others screamed for a second republic, claiming that if even the monarchy had to intervene, then the system was beyond repair. For them, this wasn't the King's moment to rise. It was everyone's moment to replace the architecture altogether. The government, fractured beyond recognition, did the only thing it could. It called in Cobra, the UK's top emergency council, not for a war, not for a terror alert, but for the threat of constitutional disintegration. For the first time, democracy itself was being treated as a national security crisis. Inside Cobra, the mood was tense beyond words. Cabinet ministers, many with secrets of their own, knew that if the wrong file leaked next, they would not survive the hour. MI6 officials, already furious over being ignored for months, began pushing for a full cross-agency investigation into both Labour and Conservative foreign financial influence dating back to 2015. But with no active parliament, there was no oversight, no structure, no referee. And then the second blow came. A whistleblower, anonymous, verified and terrifyingly precise, dropped a new tranche of documents onto encrypted networks. But these weren't about Starmer. They weren't even about Parliament. They were about the Crown itself. Included in the dump were financial correspondences linking a private royal family trust to a strategic investment in a technology conglomerate based in Hyderabad, India. The same conglomerate now being accused of funneling political donations to both Starmer and two Conservative MPs. The shock? The investment dated back to before Charles became king, when he was still Prince of Wales, steward of the Duchy of Cornwall. And while there was nothing overtly illegal in the transaction, the optics were nuclear. The very monarchy that had cast judgment over Parliament was now being tied, however indirectly, to the same geopolitical nexus at the heart of the crisis. The next day, King New began trending across Europe, panic returned. But this time, it wasn't just about politicians. It was about the very idea of moral authority. If no one could be trusted, not the Parliament, not the Prime Minister, not even the Crown, where could the people look? And so the question changed. No longer who is guilty. But now, is there anyone left who isn't? As trust collapsed, so did the economy. The pound plummeted against the dollar. International investors pulled out. The FTSE opened 12% down. Global banks issued risk alerts on British bonds.